Welcome to Project Debrief. It's the show where we take these complex topics and really get into the details. No sugarcoating here.
Yeah.
We're talking about real documents, the kind that, usually stay buried in filing cabinets.
Yeah.
And for our first deep dive this time, we're tackling something
Oh, this is a good one.
that might keep you up at night.
Yeah.
Is your phone listening to you? We've got over 4,000 pages of leaked material on data collection to unpack.
Wow.
And I think you're going to be surprised by what we found.
You know how you joke about your phone listening in? Because you get those ads for things you've only talked about.
Yeah.
Well, the reality of data collection is way more intricate than that. We're going way beyond those creepy targeted ads and into the world of government programs that you probably never even heard of.
Okay, you've got my attention. Where do we even begin with 4,000 pages?
Let's start with programs like Feedtrough and Sear Montana. Names that sound more like sci-fi villains than data collection programs.
Right. They don't exactly roll off the tongue. What are these programs all about?
Well, Feedtrough, for example. It targets Juniper NetScreen firewalls. You might even have one of those. Protecting your home network right now.
Oh, really?
What's unsettling is that this program can continue collecting data even after you've updated your system, or even replace the entire device.
Wait, so even if I do all the right things, like update my software, get a new router, I could still be vulnerable. That's a bit unnerving.
It definitely raises questions about how much control we really have over our own data.
Yeah.
And it's not just one agency involved either. These documents mention the NSA, FBI, even the CIA.
Hold on, the CIA too. I always thought they were more focused on international stuff, not what's happening on our phones here at home.
Well, their role seems to be less about directly collecting data from your phone. It's more about sharing information that they already have. For instance, the National Counterterrorism Center, or NCTC, pulls terrorism information from different departments, including the CIA.
So they're sharing.
Think of it like a massive data hub where different agencies kind of connect the dots.
Okay, so it's less about the CIA listening in on my cat videos and more about them using data that I've already gathered for other purposes. But still, with all these agencies involved, it makes you wonder, are there any rules? What's stopping them from just grabbing whatever data they want?
That's where the legal frameworks come in. Documents like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, and Executive Order 12333 lay down the ground rules for how the government can collect data. These documents define who can be targeted, like an agent of a foreign power, what electronic surveillance actually means. And they set specific limits and requirements.
So it's not a complete free-for-all. There are actual laws and procedures they have to follow.
FISA, for example, requires agencies to meet a probable cause standard before they can target someone. We're not talking about vague suspicions here. They need solid evidence.
Oh, well.
They also have to follow minimization procedures to protect the privacy of U.S. citizens who aren't the intended target.
Minimization procedures. What does that even mean in practice?
It means the agencies have to take steps to avoid collecting data on innocent people. Think of it as safeguards. They can't, for instance, target someone just because they're expressing unpopular opinions online. One training slide specifically mentions that targeting can't be based solely on activities protected by the First Amendment, like free speech.
That's somewhat reassuring. But let's be real. These are huge government agencies. Do they really always follow the rules?
That's a valid question. And it leads us to another layer of this whole data collection system, because it's not just about government agencies. Private companies play a role, too.
Really?
These documents show the NSA reaching out to companies, asking for help collecting international internet traffic, call records, and even computer data.
Wait, hold on. Private companies. We're talking about the big tech companies we use every day. Are they handing over our data to the government?
The documents don't name specific companies. They're just referred to as companies A, B, and C. But they do say that these companies volunteered to participate.
Volunteered.
Which makes you wonder, what kind of pressure were they under? What incentives did they have to cooperate?
It's starting to feel like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here.
Yeah.
And each layer is just more complex.
Yeah.
And maybe even a bit unsettling. We started with a simple question, is my phone listening? And now we're talking about government agencies, laws.
Yeah.
And now private companies are involved.
We're not even done yet.
Oh, no.
These arguments also hint at intelligence agencies from different countries working together.
Right.
One example mentions a close relationship between the NSA and Australia's Defense Signals Directorate. They're particularly interested in understanding China and cybersecurity. And they're sharing information and resources to do that.
So this isn't even limited to the U.S. This is global. I mean, where does it end?
That's a question we'll continue to explore in this series.
Okay.
But for now, what's your initial reaction to all of this?
Honestly, it's a lot to take in. It's fascinating, but also a little alarming. What gets to me is this feeling of being caught in this giant web of data collection. I'm starting to wonder how much control I really have over my own information. And it makes me think about the balance between security and privacy in the digital age. Are we sacrificing too much privacy in the name of security? And how much do we really know about what's being collected?
Those are great questions, and ones that we'll be tackling head on as we continue this series. What we've seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg.
So buckle up, everyone, because we're just getting started. We'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive into the world of data collection. Make sure to subscribe to Project Debrief so you don't miss it.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but knowledge is power, right? The more we understand how data collection works, the better equipped we are to make choices about our own privacy and security online.
Absolutely. It's not about ditching our phones and living off the grid. It's about being aware and maybe even pushing for more transparency from those in power. But speaking of power, these documents also highlight that even with all these laws and procedures, things can still go wrong.
That's right. One report we came across actually details how even with all these frameworks in place, mistakes still happen, and sometimes with significant consequences.
Mistakes? What kind of mistakes are we talking about?
Well, a lot of the reported incidents boiled down to human error. Things like analysts making typos in search queries, not setting the right limits on data searches, or even just plain old inaccurate research.
So it's not some all-seeing perfect system. There's room for human error. But how often are these errors happening, and what are the implications for us?
That's the thing. The report doesn't give us the complete picture, but it does mention a 9% increase in roamer incidents.
Roamer incidents.
Imagine this. You're visiting the U.S., and even after you leave, data collection on you continues when it should have stopped.
Oh, wow.
It also highlights a 260% jump in database query errors, often due to those human errors we talked about.
Those are some pretty big increases. So even with all the safeguards, there's still a real risk that data collection might overreach.
It seems that way, and that's why oversight and accountability are so important.
Yeah.
These reports give us a glimpse behind the curtain, but we need more transparency to really grasp how big these errors are and what they mean for us.
Right. Having rules on paper is one thing, but making sure they're followed and that there are consequences when they're not is something else entirely. But, these documents aren't just about dry legal stuff and technical jargon.
No.
They actually give us some pretty fascinating insights into how these agencies operate in the real world.
You're telling me there's a section that describes this tool called Pinwall.
Pinwall.
Which analysts use to sift through all that collected data. It even includes step-by-step instructions, almost like a user manual for spies.
A user manual for spies. That sounds like something out of a movie.
I know, right?
What kind of information are they looking for with this Pinwall tool?
Well, Pinwall seems to be this really powerful tool for digging through massive amounts of data. They can use it to track communication patterns, visualize relationships between different people or groups, and even analyze the actual content of communication.
Wow.
But the documents emphasize that it needs to be used responsibly and within legal and ethical boundaries.
So it's not just about collecting data, it's about making sense of it, finding patterns, and using that to guide intelligence operations.
Exactly. But that human element we talked about earlier, it still plays a big role. Remember those operator errors?
Yeah.
Well, another section of these documents sheds light on a real-life example where those errors and other systemic issues had major consequences. It all revolves around the EP3E incident back in 2001.
The EP3E incident. Vaguely. Remind me what happened.
A U.S. surveillance plane collided with a Chinese fighter jet and had to make an emergency landing in China. The crew was held for 11 days. And the Chinese government got their hands on the plane and all its sensitive equipment, including tons of classified information about U.S. intelligence operations.
Wow, that's a huge security breach.
Yeah.
What did the U.S. government learn from that incident?
That's where it gets really interesting. These documents include a detailed damage assessment report that breaks down what was compromised and what they did to try and contain the fallout.
So what were the biggest vulnerabilities they uncovered?
One of the most alarming was their emergency destruction procedures. The crew really struggled to destroy all the classified material before the Chinese got to it. Some equipment was smashed with a fire extinguisher, others had memory cards ripped out. It sounds pretty chaotic.
I'm surprised they wouldn't have clear protocols for a situation like that.
You'd think so. But the report indicates that their training was inadequate, the crew didn't really know, the proper destruction methods and communication during the crisis was hampered by all the chaos. Plus, there wasn't a clear inventory of all the classified material on board, making it tough to even know if they'd gotten everything.
So they didn't even know for sure what they were supposed to be destroying. That's a pretty big oversight.
It definitely points to a problem with their security culture. The report concludes that a systemic complacency regarding the safeguarding of sensitive information played a role in how bad the breach was.
Systemic complacency, that's a serious accusation. So what happened after that incident? Did they tighten up their procedures?
The report lays out a ton of recommendations, from better training to more thorough inventory systems. They even suggest creating a step-by-step guide for assessing damage in future incidents.
A how-to guide. They didn't already have something like that.
Apparently not, which is pretty surprising given what they do. It seems like this incident was a real wake-up call, forcing them to take a hard look at their practices.
Yeah.
And make some big changes.
Better late than never, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's a bit unsettling that it took such a high-profile event to trigger those changes.
It definitely underscores the need for constant vigilance, both from the agencies themselves and from outside oversight. We can't just assume that everything's running smoothly behind the scenes.
You're right. Trust but verify. Okay. But what about the actual intelligence that was lost in this incident? What exactly fell into the wrong hands?
The report goes into a lot of detail about the types of equipment and documents that were compromised. One of the most worrying was a system called used for analyzing signals intelligence.
Signals intelligence.
Think sensitive information about weapons systems, that kind of thing. The report also mentions tactical signals operating instructions being compromised, which could have given the Chinese valuable insights into U.S. military operations.
So this is bigger than just collecting data. This is about the tools and tactics used to analyze that data and the potential impact on national security.
Precisely. And it goes even further, analyzing the potential impact on U.S. relations with allies like Australia, Japan, and even Taiwan. It seems like the plane was carrying information about joint intelligence operations, which could have strained those relationships if it got out.
So the consequences of this incident were far-reaching.
It's a stark reminder that intelligence operations are incredibly complex and interconnected with ripple effects we might not even fully comprehend.
Agreed. But before we move on, there's one document I want to go back to. It's about the relationship between the NSA, Australia's Defense Signals Directorate, or DSD.
You mean the one that highlights the global nature of these intelligence operations?
Exactly. What struck me is how closely the U.S. and Australia are working together, especially when it comes to China. The document even mentions a plan to ramp up intelligence gathering on China, suggesting a strategic shift in focus toward the Asia-Pacific region.
It really highlights how intelligence plays a key role in shaping global politics.
It makes you wonder, what other secret collaborations exist between intelligence agencies around the world?
That's a question worth exploring, and we'll definitely be digging into that more in future episodes.
Okay.
But for now, let's pause and reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay, so we started by asking, is my phone listening? And we've uncovered this vast network of data collection programs, laws, government agencies, private companies, international collaborations, and even those human errors that can have major consequences. It's complicated and often secretive, but something we can't ignore.
And as we dive deeper, it's important to remember that all of this raises fundamental questions about the balance between security and privacy in our digital world. How much are we willing to give up in the name of safety? And how can we make sure these powerful tools are used responsibly and ethically?
Those are questions we all need to grapple with. But before we get into that, there's one more document that I think sheds some light on. What steps are being taken to protect our privacy? We've spent the last two parts of this deep dive really getting into the weeds of data collection. And to be honest, it's been a bit of a wild ride.
Yeah.
We started with a simple question, is my phone listening?
Yeah.
And uncovered this whole global network of surveillance programs, laws, and agencies. And even private companies getting involved. It's a lot to process. Okay. And I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about what it all means. What are the implications of all this data collection?
Yeah.
And most importantly, what can we actually do about it?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And it's important to avoid those knee-jerk reactions. It's easy to fall into extremes, thinking anyone concerned about privacy is just paranoid, or believing that all data collection is inherently bad.
I agree. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Where we can utilize data for good, for security, for innovation, even improving our lives without sacrificing our basic freedoms.
That's where those minimization procedures we talked about earlier come in.
Right.
They're supposed to protect the privacy of people who aren't the targets of surveillance.
Right. Can you remind us how those procedures work?
They involve things like masking personal information, setting limits on how long data can be kept, and establishing clear oversight mechanisms. The goal is to minimize the collection of data on innocent people.
So it's not just a free-for-all, where they scoop up everything and sort it out later?
In theory, no. But as we saw with that EP3E incident, these safeguards aren't always foolproof. Mistakes happen, technology can fail, and sometimes they're even deliberate abuses, that's why. Strong oversight and accountability are so crucial.
Speaking of oversight, one of the documents we looked at outlined the legal frameworks governing all of this. FISA and Executive Order 12333.
Right.
There are rules in place, but they're incredibly complex.
And constantly evolving. There's often debate about how these laws should be applied to specific situations. For example, the definition of an agent of a foreign power can be quite broad. And there's ongoing discussion about what level of suspicion is needed for surveillance under FISA.
It seems like there's a lot of gray area there, which could open the door for overreach.
Yeah.
Plus, technology is advancing so rapidly. How can the law possibly keep up?
That's one of the biggest challenges. Think about it. FISA was created in 1978. Back then, the concern was wiretapping landlines. Now we have massive data sets, cloud computing, AI. Right. It's a whole new world.
So how do we adapt these laws for the digital age? And how do we ensure they strike the right balance between security and privacy?
I think one of the most important steps is increasing transparency and public awareness. The more people understand about how data collection works, the better equipped we are to have informed discussions and demand change.
I completely agree. It's about empowering people to make informed decisions about their own data and hold those in power accountable. But let's be realistic. Most people don't have the time to sift through thousands of pages of documents like we did. How do we make this information accessible and understandable?
That's where initiatives like Project Debrief come in. By breaking down these complex topics into manageable pieces, using clear language and relatable examples, we can help close that knowledge gap.
It's about making this information less intimidating and more engaging.
Exactly.
And not just raising awareness, but encouraging critical thinking.
Exactly. We need to move beyond blind trust or blanket distrust and develop a more nuanced understanding.
Right.
We should be asking questions like, what are the legitimate reasons for collecting this data? What protections are in place for privacy? Are there other ways to achieve security goals without sacrificing so much individual freedom?
Those are great questions. And this isn't just some abstract debate.
No.
These issues have real-world consequences for all of us.
Think about the impact on free speech. If people are worried about their online activities being monitored, they might self-censor. That has a chilling effect on open dialogue, which is crucial for a healthy democracy.
And it's not just about free speech. It's about our fundamental right to privacy, to control our own information, and to live our lives without feeling like we're constantly being watched.
We need to keep pushing for greater transparency, accountability, and meaningful oversight of these programs. We have to ensure they're operating within the law, serving legitimate purposes, and not infringing on our rights.
So where do we go from here? What can we as individuals actually do to make a difference in this landscape?
First and foremost, stay informed, keep learning about these issues, talk to others, and share your knowledge. Support organizations that are fighting for privacy rights and digital freedoms.
And don't be afraid to ask tough questions. Challenge the status quo. Demand transparency. Remember, our collective voices can make a difference.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The future of data collection and privacy is not set in stone. It's something we, as a society, have the power to shape.
That's a powerful message. We're not just passive consumers of technology. We're active participants in shaping the digital future. So let's make our voices heard.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of data collection. Stay tuned for future episodes of Project Debrief, where we'll continue to unpack complex and important topics.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.